Jimmy McGill, Saul Goodman, Victor St. Clair, Gene Takovich, whatever you want to call him, is the protagonist of Better Call Saul and features in Breaking Bad alongside the rest of the main cast. Jimmy is a sketchy, Albuquerque-based lawyer living a double life as a conman. As the series progresses, he alters the lives of everyone around him for both the positive and the negative, 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 and the He finds himself involved with the cartel, and this changes Jimmy's direction for the rest of his life. So, where did it all go wrong for Albuquerque's most famous lawyer? Please join me for a deep dive into the character of James Jimmy Morgan McGill, also known as Saul Goodman. Jimmy's father owned a local convenience store. He was viewed as a very sympathetic person and was recognised by the local community as a functioning member of society. Due to his known caring nature, he was often struck by local conmen. Through this, from a very young age, Jimmy learnt the world he lived in was unfair. He viewed these conmen as winners and began to steal from the cash register, and he viewed his father as a loser. Jimmy's brother Charles Chuck McGill accused Jimmy of stealing over $14,000 from the store, but his father, who refused to see the bad in people, dismissed this claim. The store would end up going under and eventually filing for bankruptcy, and just 6 months later, Jimmy's father would be dead. The death of their father triggered a growing hatred within Chuck, as he blamed Jimmy for the store's failure, whereas Jimmy deflected responsibility and instead placed blame upon his own father's generosity and good nature. This untimely death would cause a separation of mentality for the McGill children, with Chuck representing the personification for hard work makes good work, and Jimmy building upon the idea that you can always cheat the system. Years later, Jimmy would become known to the streets as Slippin' Jimmy after grafting a small fortune through slip and fall schemes and other low-level scams. He would do this alongside his best friend Marco. Eventually, due to all of his shenanigans, Jimmy gets arrested, and Chuck bails him out, with the deal being that Jimmy adopts a new mentality and leaves his life of crime behind in Cicero, and moves to New Mexico to work in the mailroom of HMM, Chuck's law firm. Jimmy obliges. As we join Jimmy in Season 1, he works as a public defender, making very little money, living up to his promise to Chuck to live an honest life. The Kettlemans are accused of embezzlement, and following interest from HHM, Jimmy is dropped as the Kettlemans' lawyer. Following a failed attempt to win back the Kettlemans, Jimmy has a brush with drug lord Tuco Salamanca. Jimmy demonstrates his people skills to the drug lord after successfully talking Tuco down from murder to just 2 broken legs for Jimmy's accomplices. However, the lawyer's expert speaking skills lands himself on the radar of the cartel. One of these members, Ignacio Nacho Varga, tells Jimmy about his intentions to steal $1.6 million from the Kettlemans' embezzled funds. Concerned for the Kettlemans' safety, Jimmy warns them about Nacho's activity, leading to the Kettlemans being kidnapped. Jimmy grows suspicious of this kidnapping and finds the Kettlemans camping out in the woods with the $1.6 million. They bribe Jimmy $30,000 to forget everything he saw, which he accepts. It's important to understand why he does this, as after doing everything right, Jimmy does not get rewarded. He works a minimum wage job after slaving away for 7+ years in the mailroom, and yet his own clients misjudge his ability and pursue HHM over him, causing shades of Slippin' Jimmy to reappear, as he is willing to bend the law and accept the bribe, after telling Nacho just an episode ago that he is not a criminal. He has already slipped back into his old habits. Though he does eventually return the money, showing that Jimmy has not yet abandoned his morality. After discovering Sandpiper Crossing's overcharging of their residents, Jimmy and Chuck work together to build a case against the company. For the first time in a long time, Chuck has worked on a case following his non-official diagnosis of electromagnetic hypersensitivity. Chuck convinces Jimmy that the case is too big for them, so is brought to HHM, which Howard is eager to accept. But Jimmy is denied participation on the case. It is revealed that Chuck was the reason for this development, and was also why Jimmy was not initially hired under HHM when he passed the bar exam, all because Chuck did not respect Jimmy and see him as a peer, essentially concluding that Jimmy cheated his way into becoming a lawyer. Despite trying to live an honest life like Chuck had previously requested, Jimmy is still looked down upon by him, when, in reality, all he wants is to be accepted and noticed by his brother. Recommended by Kim Wexler, a skillful lawyer and love interest that Jimmy met in their mailroom, Jimmy is now working at Davis & Maine, though he lands himself in hot water from Founder Clifford, Maine, after filming a commercial involving Sandpiper Crossing behind his back. He's given a second chance at the company, but due to Kim's involvement in Jimmy's hiring, she is demoted to dock review. Jimmy tries to negotiate with Chuck to try and reinstate Kim, and is even willing to quit the law to try and achieve this. Even though his attempts fail, this is the first time we truly see how much Jimmy is willing to sacrifice for Kim, a common reoccurring theme that we will continue to see throughout this series. After being fired from Davis & Maine following some shenanigans, Jimmy approaches Kim about teaming up and starting their own law firm together. Kim counters this offer and suggests they start separate firms under the same roof so that they can keep relying on each other when necessary. After informing Howard of her intended departure, they race to secure Mesa Verde, a bank looking to expand regionally that Kim acquired under HHM. Kim is successful in retaining the client. Chuck prays for his condition to successfully law back Mesa Verde, all while speaking ill of Kim's ability, but due to his overexposure to electricity, this sends Chuck into shock and he is hospitalized. Purely driven by Kim, Jimmy sabotages Chuck's documents by altering the address on every single one at a local copy store. Upon Chuck's full recovery, he makes a mockery of himself at court after his documents are incorrect. This leads to Mesa Verde dropping HHM and returning to Kim. Jimmy discovers Chuck covering his house from top to bottom in foil. This causes Jimmy to confess that Chuck's failures with the address was due to Jimmy's intervention. Unbeknownst to Jimmy, Chuck was playing up the extremity of his illness and was recording their conversation. Ironically, I picture this scene as the moment where Chuck and Jimmy are most similar. The extent of desperation Chuck exuberates to prove that he was right the whole time is only paralleled by Jimmy's obsession with trying to get Mesa Verde to rehire Kim. You could even argue that Chuck acted similar to Slip and Jimmy, as he was also using underhanded immoral tactics that Chuck would never have stooped to previously. This moment is pivotal in understanding Chuck's character, and he gradually loses everything due to his hatred of his brother consuming his whole life. Upon learning of Chuck's illegal recording, an irate Jimmy breaks down Chuck's door to confront him about it. A private investigator and Howard reveal themselves while Jimmy destroys the tape, giving Chuck the ground to report Jimmy to the police. Jimmy is arrested. Chuck proposes for no jail time, and instead seeks for Jimmy's disbarment. The hearing room is set up. The panel is present. Howard, Kim, everyone is there. Jimmy even invites Chuck's ex-wife, Rebecca, to the hearing. Jimmy asks about Chuck's mental illness and how close an electronic device must be for Chuck to be affected. Expecting a trick, Jimmy reveals that the phone he was carrying has no battery in it, just like Chuck had predicted. What Chuck was unaware of was that he had been carrying a cell phone battery himself for more than an hour. The premise that his illness was all in his head causes an angry outburst from Chuck. This outburst turns the theory towards Jimmy and Kim, and following the hearing, Jimmy's original sentence would be reduced and he would only be barred from acting as a lawyer for 1 year. Rebecca requests Jimmy come with him to see Chuck, who was not answering the door, but he refuses, stating that he was no longer Chuck's brother. Jimmy had finally cut out Chuck from his life. Talking with Howard, Chuck agrees that it was time to bury the feud with Jimmy and move on with his life. Despite this, the next day Jimmy successfully sabotages Chuck's malpractice insurance, causing it to skyrocket. Even though Jimmy had already won, he still wanted to hurt Chuck. Jimmy had been treated like a disappointment all his life, and all his efforts to be noticed by his brother had been met with rejection. Chuck wanted to keep Jimmy under his thumb and out of trouble, but Jimmy wanted to fly. All his years of caring after his brother had been ignored, and after all this time, Jimmy wanted to take the one thing away from Chuck that he could not live without: the law. Upon hearing of the increase in Chuck's insurance, Howard floats the idea of retirement, as HHM could no longer afford to pay for it. Furious, Chuck threatens to sue HHM for $8 million, and to counter this, Howard pays the first installment to buy him out. This forces Chuck into retirement. We see the McGill brothers together a final time, where a remorseful Jimmy tries to make amends with his older brother. Jimmy is rejected, and told by his last remaining blood relative that he never mattered all that much to him. Chuck relapses, and he intentionally starts a fire, burning everything to ashes and cinders, including himself. The story of the two brothers is one of tragedy. Chuck died with Jimmy thinking that he hated him, and Jimmy has to live with that for the rest of his life. He was never forgiven by Chuck, and despite all his efforts, he never truly made him proud. Even though they are bound by blood, they could never have been further apart.